City Council for Tuesday night, October 19th to order. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Council. We only have one item on the agenda this evening, and that's the workshop on bicycle infrastructure in Ames. And Council, I think tonight what we're going to do is we'll let staff go ahead and make their full presentation. Anybody else that wants to give a formal presentation, then we can have some questions and minor discussion by Council. Open it up for public input, and then close it public input, and then proceed with some concluding discussion. And just for everyone's information, as probably you may have garnered by looking at the packet, staff will be recommending to hire a consultant to do a master plan on bike infrastructure. So this will not be the last opportunity for people to give input. In fact, there'll probably be a lot of input, I would guess, going forward. But this is just kind of like a little bit of a kickoff and conversation. So don't want people to leave feeling disappointed like there aren't major decisions made or referrals made, because well, it could be that staff recommends that we wait until we get a consultant on board to help us really do master plans. So anyway, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Damien and John and company, and welcome and take her away.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, for the workshop tonight. Here's some items that we're going to go over, but before, we had a fairly good sized group help put together this presentation, more than just City of Ames staff. So let me go through a bit of introductions real quick. Obviously, you know John Joyner, our Public Works Director. Mark Ganson is with Traffic. He handles a lot of the design and CIP. Behind me is Justin Clausen. He oversees our operations and maintenance. Kyle Thompson is a transportation planner, so a lot of the MPO items, it's his primary responsibility to look at. Keith Abraham with Parks. Chris Strawhecker is with Iowa State. And then Mike Cox is with Story County. And Jerry Peters, which I saw Jerry, is with the Ames School District. So I think when we looked at some of the items and the goals for this meeting, we wanted to make sure all those different jurisdictions were represented. So one of the things that we're going to go over tonight is obviously our existing network. So we structured the presentation to kind of go through not only a good overview of our trail system, but if anybody is unfamiliar with how we plan for trails, how we program trails, all the different processes that in the thought that goes into creating a trail network and a bike infrastructure network, both for recreation and transportation. I hope that this presentation is kind of a good educational tool, good civics tool to figure out when you can be involved and how you can bring your ideas forward to staff and get them into any of these plans. So one of the things we're going to start with is go over the existing network. I think one of the things specifically we wanted to touch on, we can touch on other intercity connections, but one of them was connections to the High Trestle Trail. Obviously, the long-range planning for trails as it stands today is in our long-range transportation plan, which is currently called Forward 45. One of the things we'll get into is maybe some of the pros and cons of having trail planning exclusively in that document, and I'll tie it to why we're going to be planning a bike ped master plan, which would be an Ames-only document versus an MPO document. We're going to go for what is currently come up. So the CIP will be our next 5 years worth of projects, at least illustrative as far as trail projects go, but there's other places in the CIP we'll touch on. We'll go over the complete street plan. So if anybody's not familiar with the complete street plan that Ames has, I can talk about where it, from a high level, where it speaks to bike infrastructure and how it would help kind of guide design. And then finally, we'll go over path maintenance and how we work together with Iowa State, both from a network and a maintenance standpoint. And then finally, we're going to touch on eminent domain. So if there is any trail gaps that have difficulty, how we can or cannot use eminent domain to fill in those gaps. So here's a very brief overview. I won't get into any detail unless there's questions. And by the way, feel free, Council, to stop me at any point in the presentation if questions come up. But here's just an existing network. So the red is all of our trails, shared use path system. The purple is on-street bike lanes. And then the purple is bike-friendly street. I'm sorry, blue is bike-friendly streets. So you can see that, and you'll see how some of the planning fills in some of the gaps, but this is our existing network as it stands today. And this is what you're wondering what this picture is. This is the bike ped map that we publish. We try and keep it up to date every 2 to 3 years. So this is, if you ever got a bike route map, this is what that looks like. And so the planning, and this is, so when I was talking earlier about the MPO, so after the 2000 census, well, funny note, like historical note, Ames had a bike ped master plan, and I think the oldest one that I found was in the 90s. So we had our own standalone regional bike plan even before we became an MPO. And then after the 2000 census, when we became an MPO, all regional transportation planning got essentially somewhat absorbed into the long-range plan process. So we took our bike ped master plan and moved it into the MPO documents. And the good thing about it is, well, we had all the regional coordination partners that an MPO provides. The problem is so our current plan, these were all the trail projects that were discussed during the long-range plan. And we had a issues and visioning workshop, which essentially was what's working and what's not working about the current system. And then the consultant put together all these different projects, both that were suggested by the citizenry and by the consultant, to try and address some of those issues and visioning. And they did, so they had an alternative workshop where they presented all these projects. And so that's the positive thing, in my opinion, about the MPO and the MPO process, is you have public meetings, they're regional, they include a very wide group of constituencies. Somewhat the trouble, though, with the long-range plan is because of the federal requirements and DOT requirements, the long-range plan has to be fiscally constrained, which means that all those projects, I wouldn't say they get lost, obviously, so they're documented, you can see in that picture, but they're not in the plan because the plan is constrained and our plan is a 25-year plan. So you say, well, what can you afford and what can you not afford? So you have to filter out, and you can imagine, and you can see there's a very large group of projects that were suggested that somewhat fall out of the plan, at least the constrained wise. And the reason why this is maybe not the best vehicle for our planning for the city of Ames and even into our growth areas is because the purpose of this plan primarily is for federal aid eligibility. It doesn't necessarily mesh well with the comp plan. It doesn't mesh well with other growth policies or what we would consider an ideal network should look like. It gets much more into specific things because they want to know what can you afford and what you can't afford. So I hope that kind of gives some flavor of why initially I think it seemed like this was a great way to deal regional planning for trails. But because of the requirements of this type of planning, we're looking to kind of resurrect the bike ped master plan. And with that, and you can see, one thing I wanted to touch on is that the way this is structured is the short-term plan, which is all the blue lines, blue projects, and the committed projects, which are in black. These are the things where they get taken from the long-range plan and put into the capital improvement plan. So that's where we actually budget money locally and assign, if there's federal dollars, we assign it that way. And Mark Ganson can go over what the current CIP is.
So this is a shared use path system expansion sheet from last year's CIP, the 2021 CIP. So hopefully this list of projects looks pretty familiar. And one reason for that is because this list, the majority of these projects have gone through previous long-range plan updates, and they moved their way up through various long-range plans and ultimately end up in the CIP when the priority reaches a high level and we can have the funding to complete the projects. So we have 5 years there of the projects that we have. And for example, this time of year is when we would be preparing our new CIP and starting that process. So we'd be adding the new 5th year project for the next CIP. One process that happens every year for that is we meet with ABC and Iowa State together to go over the network, what projects were completed, updates on various construction projects, and then to get feedback on where do we need to go next and what's a priority for the 5th year. So we'll be having that meeting shortly. We're trying to get that scheduled here right now. And then to dive a little deeper into each project, once the CIP is approved in spring, we generally start the design of the project in late spring, early summer, depending on the project and depending on its funding sources, mainly if there are MPO funds and if it is a federal letting. That design process varies in length considerably. Local project, we typically wrap up design in the fall with public outreach meetings happening over the summer or fall. And usually construction can easily happen in the following year, which would be the second year of the number listed. That's the general process. Sometimes if we have MPO funding and we have to follow a DOT letting, that could push back a year. Obviously varies if there's acquisition needs for easement or property. So that's just kind of the general schedule of how the CIP works. So for example, the 21-22 project has 2 locations. We have consultants on board for both of those projects at this point in time, and we've initiated design on them. Expect to have preliminary plans soon and can move forward into public outreach on both of those projects here late this fall, early winter. And hopefully both of them can occur with construction next year. The Iowa Creek project, I'll mention that specifically because it does show the MPO funding there. That project is one that could be pushed back into 2023. That one's a little unique as well because we have the flood mitigation project that we're heavily coordinating construction on. So that's just kind of a brief overview of the CIP and kind of how all the schedules fall in line. Go ahead to the next slide, if you will.
Sure. Just quick point of clarification. Yeah. Can you go back 2 slides? Just the black lines, are those the ones that are shown on the CIP list that you just went over? Yeah. Thank you. So everyone just is aware that that is, when it says facility projects, I want to make sure that everyone understands those are shown as being funded. Yeah, or to be funded in our CIP right now.
Or even complete. Some of them were even completed at that point in time. They wanted to make sure that it was noted.
Yeah, because the long-range plan process is 18 to 24 months, so you could easily get one construction year in by the time some of these projects are actually adopted in the plan. Okay.
So this is the map of the existing network overlaid with projects in the CIP, and just to go over them real quickly, I'll kind of walk fiscal year by fiscal year just to kind of show how we're tying in a lot of key gaps in the network and establishing connections. The first project, basically for the new CIP, would be fiscal year 22-23, and that is a shared use path along Grand Avenue. It's kind of in the center bottom of the screen right there. And that extends from Lincoln Way up to 6th Street. The second project, FY 23-24, is just out to the east of the first project, and it's basically the connection of the shared use path along Lincoln Way all the way out to Dakota.
Yeah, right now, if you're out there, I think that's the area where it's like a frontage road. So if you're a bike, you have to go down a frontage road and mix with like heavy equipment. So this would fill in an actual trail.
Jumping to 24-25 is at the very bottom of the screen, and that's somewhat of a unique project, and that's a connection between the dog park and the Skunk River Trail. So we anticipate that extending north from the dog park down a pretty steep embankment and then over directly to the Skunk River Trail. So that'll provide a pretty unique connection for that area of town. The next fiscal year is 25-26, and we'll stay in that area of town. And it's a project along South Dayton, specifically tying in Southeast 16th Street up to Lincoln Way. And that's a project that we've got quite a bit of feedback on, and I know there's quite a bit of desire to get that project complete. I will mention we show a project kind of to the northwest of town under both fiscal year 24-25 and 25-26. That's in direct coordination with Parks and Rec. and a project that they're looking at doing with establishing bridge in that area and getting a path connection from the park. So that we expect that to show up in the new CIP. And then at the north side of town, I should also mention that we show a future connection along Hyde all the way up to 190th. So that has kind of different avenues that could be pursued for how it gets built, but we wanted to note that that is a key connection as we look to expand our network and create connections. So I should also mention that we focused on the shared use path system expansion program as it is directly related to the meeting. But there are other programs in the CIP where both bike and ped improvements come up, specifically the multimodal roadway improvements, accessibility enhancement, as well as various specific street projects. A lot of the times if we're doing a street project and it's addressing a project from the long range plan, either an on-street or an off-street facility, that project will get built in with the street project and get completed as such, just so we kind of receive savings from economies of scale, and we can do one public outreach effort and really have a comprehensive project for that corridor. So in total, those various programs basically average out to $1.2 million per year of funding going towards these improvements.
Before we change slides, could you clarify the bridge that you talked about in the parks? That's going to connect what to what?
Yeah, I might even, Keith, you want to come up?
So for right now, you know, the overall goal with that bridge over the Iowa Creek would connect the Memorial Park, which is on the east side of Iowa Creek, with a section of Memorial Park that's on the west side. Right now, we're working with Public Works and Water to put a plan together for that west portion, which we're probably looking at nutrient reduction and so on. But it'll be some prairie, and what we're going to do is we're going to just do some natural trails through that prairie once it's established. So what this little section of trail does, it goes off one of our existing trails in Memorial, comes down to the bridge over Iowa Creek, and then we'll just, for the time being, we'll just have natural trails connected on that west portion. One of the things that Damian and Mark and I talked about last week was eventually what we will do is try to get this connected all the way up to Ontario. And I also met with Chris Strawhacker from Iowa State last week, and they are going to be doing some lighting from Ontario along Shoal Road all the way out to the Applied Science Building. And we talked about there for a while, there may just be some on-road bike lanes along Shoal Road. So really the next step would be to try to make that connection from the lower portion up Shoal Road where there's gravel, try to do something maybe off the side of that gravel to make that connection. So that will happen after we do the bridge and make that connection to the west part of Iowa Creek.
So that would allow someone to go from Memorial Park all the way to Reactor Woods.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's huge.
Yeah. Still a lot of pieces to work out, but we're getting there.
Yep.
Any other questions?
A couple other things I might highlight about the map, if they don't stick out to council or anybody looking at the map, is that we have actually three intercity connections that are essentially substantially there, not fully. There's still some gaps. But Nevada, so that 2324 project will help bridge a gap to on-street bike lanes that are on Lincoln Way. That goes all the way to Nevada and then jumps onto their trail system. South Dakota and some other trails, I mean, some of it's cut off here on the south end of the map. Go down to Slater, which eventually connects to places like the High Trestle Trail and the Central Iowa, Heart of Iowa trail systems. And then the future connection, which is substantially developer driven. It's a responsibility of the developments that are along the west side. But that eventually will connect to the county's trail that they built on Grant, which is what is Hyde in the county's grant, north of 190th, which goes all the way to Gilbert. So you can see in a fairly short period of time, we hope to have 3 inner city connections, and obviously to the greater Iowa trail system, we'd have connections there. And so to illustrate the High Trestle Trail connection, so Google is not evidently up to date, but we have actually built a trail. So if you look at University, you can see where my pointer is. University south of Highway 30, when you get down to the research park, specifically Cottonwood and University, there is a southwest trail connection that's been built next to some of the development there. And it continues down through Iowa State's property, goes by, I believe, the dairy farm, and ends at R38. And R38, gosh, it's maybe over 10 years ago, is when they put in on-street bike lanes along with that project. And then once you get down to Slater, it goes back onto a separated shared use path, and that's one of the connections to the High Trestle Trail. You can also get there. There's a small gap that we'll need to infill for trail, but you can also get there over the trail on the west side of South Dakota. It ends at the southwest corner of that interchange. So there is a small gap, probably less than probably 300-400 feet before the bike lanes, the on-street bike lanes begin. So I think one of the things that you could be on either the shoulder, there's a paved shoulder there, or you could take the full lane as a cyclist and then get into the on-street bike lanes. But that is an area, I think, especially for cyclists who maybe aren't comfortable being on the full lane, that we could make a small connection there. But it is extremely small gap. Like I said, it's only a couple hundred feet.
So Damien, those lines are running down R38, even though the map has R38 to the west.
I don't know why there's it's labeled both. Google labels them both as R38.
Okay.
I don't know if one was old R38 and then it got redirected, because the one to the west is unpaved. It's a gravel road. So, and I know that the county is here too, like for if there's questions when we get towards the end of the presentation on their trail programming and planning. Another item, so kind of the next item in the presentation was how we work with Iowa State, and also how we coordinate our trail program with them. But then to give an overview of the purpose and kind of goals of the trail system for Iowa State. This is a map. If you're kind of wondering where our jurisdictional boundaries begin and end, so anything that's green on this map, and I do understand that it's busy, but hopefully the colored parcels help illustrate where Iowa State owned property is. So all the kind of the trail or sidewalk systems on those areas substantially are under Iowa State's maintenance and operation. And we have Chris Strawhacker, who's here tonight to kind of go through some of the context of how Iowa State trails are looked at. Because the city of Ames has a very different purpose for and use of our trail system than when you get on to some places dense as the core ISU campus. So Chris, go ahead.
So one of the things that Damien just mentioned was the density of people on campus, and circulation on Iowa State's campus is, we have many modes of transportation. We've got buses, delivery trucks, pedestrians, bikes, as you can see in this image. When you add in motorcycles, personal vehicles, skateboards, scooters, we have limited space to accommodate all of those in specific designated spaces. So we have to do a lot of shared, whether it's shared use paths or shared streets, to do that. Go to the next slide, Damien. So when there isn't enough room, our goal is really to create an expectation of where certain modes should be, and that tries to minimize the amount of conflict that we have between cars and pedestrians, cars and bikes, pedestrians. Borrowing some of the programs that you've implemented in Campus Town, that Walk Your Wheels, that allows us to designate sidewalks on campus for pedestrians primarily, and then through access control gates on some of our streets. We can designate roads for bicycle circulation. Really what we think about bikes as a different mode of vehicle. So we expect them to use roads, get to a provided bike parking space, and then riders would then get off and walk and be a pedestrian on the sidewalks on campus to get to their main destinations. Next slide. As far as coordination, Damien and Mark have talked about, kind of community engagement on campus. Things work a little bit differently. We have some advisory groups that we rely on to give us input on transportation. So parking division through the ISU Department of Public Safety manages and funds bike improvements on campus. The Transportation Advisory Council provides input to parking division. And we have a bicycle advisory group that focuses primarily on bike and some pedestrian issues to give us a broad input from the campus community. As was said earlier, we have meetings at least twice a year with the Ames Bike Coalition and Public Works. And then quarterly, we meet with Public Works and Park and Recreation to talk about planning issues or projects that might be related to circulation or other issues on campus and at the edges of campus. Next one. So in addition to that input that we get from the campus community and the Ames community, we also do some inventory of our bike parking and bike facilities on campus. So this map shows the 109 parking areas on campus for bikes. The central core part of campus, we have about 3,900 bike rack or bike parking spaces. When we inventory bikes, we have as many as 1,200 bikes parked, in that one class period. That gives us an idea of where demand is for bike parking and where conditions need to be improved. Our bike racks need to be maintained and upgraded every year. So we use this as an idea of where to put the funding that we have for bike facilities. Next slide. This is a different version of the part of the path slide that was shown earlier. As we go through and inventory bike parking, we also look at where our routes are and what the condition of the pavement is. That doesn't always tell us where we need to prioritize improvements. This can tell us what the condition is, but it doesn't tell us where people need or where they have problems riding. Next slide. So a couple of years ago, we brought a consultant to campus and went through a planning study, a small scale of what I think you're going to be talking about later this evening. But that helped us identify areas that needed more focus, where the connections needed to be improved. With input from students, faculty, and staff through a survey and an online mapping tool, we identified 5 areas to prioritize for path improvements or connections. On the west side of campus along Union Drive and West Street intersection, Osborne Drive in the north part of campus, Beach Road from Lincoln Way up to Wallace Road, Stang Road from University Boulevard down to Osborne, and then Wallace Road on the northeast side of campus. Those areas are included in our 5-year plan. One of them is a priority for the next 5 years, that Stang connection between University Boulevard and Osborne Drive, to provide a more clearly defined path for people entering from the north. And then the red dots identify bike parking improvements that we have planned for the next in the next 5 years as well.
So the next piece of the presentation, and one thing I might add on to what Chris was saying, maybe before I go on to the complete street plan, was that one of the major functions that we coordinate on is the interfaces between the city's trail system and Iowa State, because we do think it's important. I think as the planning evolves and we get more detailed on how we want to treat modal transportation, we look at the idea of trip chaining. So we want to make sure that if you ride to a location, you need to dismount, like when you get onto campus and walk your bike, that you have clear paths to those parking areas, and same with, and then you walk on campus, and then when you get back onto a different mode and go onto the City of Ames transportation system, same with connections of bikes to transit and so forth. So one of the focuses of all of our planning is the multimodal connections between the different modes. And so it's not just an infrastructure gap, it's also a use. You think about it like, how does a user want to switch from one mode to the other? And are there areas to improve those? Because if one mode fails, then you're stuck with only another. So making those connections between them is as important as just having pavement on the ground. So one of the focus areas I wanted to touch on. So the complete street plan, really the main piece of it related to bike infrastructure. So the complete street plan is just that, it's complete street. So it talks about all modes, all land use types, and all street types. But I kind of tried to peel out of the complete street plan the areas that are most specific to bike infrastructure. And that's really where you look in the street type. So a street type is kind of a fancy way of saying, what is the design standards for the right-of-way, for the street? The place type is the zoning, but it gets into more general. It's not as specific as actual legal zoning. It's more of groups of land uses that are compatible. So things that are like commercial, residential, or industrial, or mixed use. And we'll go through some of what those areas look like, but really focusing more on the design of the street. And one of the biggest pieces that's driving this is this graphic here on the right-hand side. This is something that is eventually will be in the AASHTO Bikeway Design Guide update. Not exactly sure why it's taken them so long to publish the update. I've seen drafts for maybe 3 years, but this graphic doesn't change. And the reason why is this is heavily study driven. And what the graph is a volume and speed chart that tells you when you can mix different modes. So when you need to split bikes from vehicles, and you can see the first division of that happens between around 25 and 30 miles an hour and 3,000 and 6,000 cars. So you have a window where you need to start to separate bikes from cars, but they can be adjacent to each other. When you start to increase volume and speed or a combination thereof, you need to start to provide not only separation from bikes and vehicles, but you need to provide some sort of protection. And you might be wondering, well, what is that? Well, it could be a whole host of things. It could be a curb. It could be an actual physical barrier like you might see on a bridge. It could be, for instance, like on South Duff, where we just widened, there's tubular delineators along the path. It really is jurisdictionally dependent on what is appropriate. And that's one of the things that I'll touch on when we talk about the Bike Ped Master Plan, but we'll get more specific about what's appropriate and where by corridor, by speed, by traffic volume. Obviously, that's maybe the more hard design criteria and data. And maybe something to touch on at the top is that every study on this issue has shown that there's a large amount of cyclists, especially younger cyclists or people who don't cycle often as their primary mode of transportation, just isn't comfortable mixing with cars, especially ones that are moving at any kind of rate of speed or volume. But when we do pick the right type of facility, the affected neighborhood and who's using that route. So the neighborhood feedback is always critical. And that's what I was touching on earlier was like, what is an appropriate level of treatment? There's the science, there's the national guidelines, but locally we need to make some of these decisions ourselves. We can get guidance from national standards, but the Bike Ped Master Plan and the public feedback that would be associated with that can help refine those national standards. And then finally, there might be some areas. So even if we find a street or a right of way where we want a bike facility to be, somewhere along that route, there might be something that we can't design our way out of. There might be some topographic issue. There might be a right-of-way constraint or impact, historical things that need to be preserved, so forth. And that doesn't mean you just give up on the route. Part of the Bike Ped Master Plan is that maybe you could find a parallel route that's equally useful. But this is where some of this complete street guide can help guide and provide guidance about whether we pick this route or we look for an alternate one. I don't necessarily, unless council wants to, I won't go through in detail any of the complete street plan. But some of the first two street types, both the shared and the mixed use, are downtown areas. Those are very similar, I think, conceptually or philosophically to what you would think of campus. They're very heavily pedestrian oriented. The expectation by and large is that you've parked your car at some kind of centralized parking location, that bikes can be on the street because of the speed and volume are low because they're central business districts. And the sidewalks are primarily for like cafes, seating areas, walking, things like that. The next street type is something that we see probably the most of, especially in Iowa, is just neighborhood streets. This is where we would expect, other than maybe neighborhood collector streets, that you would see bikes to be able to be on the street. So this type of street, you're only going to see sidewalks, and we would perhaps put either signage or other type of warning for any on-street bike facility that we might want. This is also kind of the street where you might see sharrows or bikes may use full lane types of signs. The mixed use avenue is more of an arterial collector street. We don't have very many of these types of streets, perhaps in Ames. We will as certain developments like in Campus Town along Lincoln Way. So it's really the edge of a mixed use development where you would have heavy transit use, heavy vehicle use, like you're mixing all the modes, and you really need to start providing space for each pieces and part. So the avenue is more, I should say that the mixed use is really where you're starting to see commercial and residential and jobs, employment. So it's a very wide range of land uses that this is appropriate. The avenue is a little bit more of like what you would see along the north section of Duff, where it's almost primarily residential, but it's an arterial street, maybe a collector street, where you're going to have transit associated with, but the speed and the volume allow for, you still have to provide space for all the different modes like shown in the picture, but you don't necessarily need to have buffers and protection. The thoroughfare and the boulevard are just two steps of the same type of arterial street. So this is where you're getting into those traffic volumes and those speeds in those suburban areas where you're primarily highway-oriented commercial or industrial property, where it's not residential, it's not around school areas, and this is where you have access to large parking lots where you really have to have a separated path of some kind. And this is just more separated. So I think one of the things about this complete street plan is as you start to find the need for buffering and separation, that you also provide like a level of stress through design that is appropriate, so that you, when you get to higher speed, higher volume, you can't just have necessarily a curb. You might want like a planted strip or some other kind of separation that makes it less stressful for people walking and biking. There's not a whole lot perhaps to say about industrial streets other than they get treated very similar as far as the volume as maybe residential streets, except they have very high peaks. But during the middle of the day, there almost no traffic at all on industrial streets because they're all driven by shift work mostly. So they have very high peak conditions. So when we look at industrial streets, as it pertains to a network connection, so you're trying to run a network connection through what is adjacent to industrial land, we just want to make sure that the crossing areas where their vehicles conflicts or truck conflicts might be, that those are marked well and signed well. And greenways is just anything that's not within a right of way. So the bike ped master plan, going off of what I said earlier about the long range plan, really left some gaps in how we can set an expectation for a bike infrastructure system. It becomes somewhat of gray, it created some gray areas about what do we do in growth areas. And then it also, when we've tried to in the past, for example, we wanted to get certain trail segments built, but we have one plan that shows it being unfunded, and you have a development that's going in. So as you can imagine, it creates some ambiguity and gray area. All that essentially would go away from a policy standpoint when we have a bike ped master plan. How we build the bike ped master plan, I think, is first on like a data-driven approach. So I think council saw we had a street light license. We've tried to invest in a lot of data collection that specifically picks up bikes and peds. The streetlight data, we've expanded that license so it includes in non-motorized travel. So now we have a regional data set where we can start to see where heavy use is. And obviously it is related to the existing system, but we can start to like use that as one data point to prioritize and plan for trail based upon its use and then where potential use could be. I think one of the things that we wanted out of the bike ped master plan was to get into those network wide and those regional connections. So all of those areas that kind of fell away in the long range plan would stay in the plan. So because our plan, as you can see, maybe at the bottom, wouldn't be fiscally constrained. That doesn't mean that it's pie in the sky. We would still forecast revenues and expenses related to these, but we would put kind of in expected timeframes. I think one of the best plans that I saw would be somewhat similar to it was the Denver Moves plan, if anybody's ever seen that, because it built in kind of a shell expansion of the network entirely based upon an investment level, which is very similar to what we have. So we have a policy where we want to invest on average 1.2 million in trails. And I think for the past CIPs, we've been exceeding that. That we can, in the bike ped master plan, kind of break this into timeframes of when we expect to build out this larger network. And the bike ped master plan would also tie directly with the comp plan. So we're working with planning to make sure that it's referenced in both the Ames plan 2040, however it needs to be, and then of course any of our development standards and subdivision standards. So eventually, once the plan is adopted, we'll have other places in code that we want to codify and make sure that the bike ped master plan has the weight that it needs to make sure that it gets built. And then Mark, since it's somewhat Mark's project to manage, well, he was going to go over some of the schedule on that bike ped master plan.
Yeah, so right now we're preparing the RFP, and we want to be pretty comprehensive in the RFP and make sure we're asking for the things that we ultimately need. So we're working on that. We kind of have a framework in place right now. Our next step is to essentially kind of refer to some other cities who have already done this. Damien had mentioned Denver. We're going to look at some other cities as well. Maybe pull some pieces from the plans that they implemented and what they were looking for to help guide us to what we need. Once we have that RFP out, we'll solicit proposals from consultants this winter and have a plan finalized in 2022. And then implementation of the wayfinding improvements would be wrapped up by 2023-24. We have another wave of funding in that fiscal year. So we kind of anticipate a two-phase implementation of the wayfinding strategies that come from the bike ped master plan, along with the plan to guide future infrastructure improvements.
So one question on that. I think we have some needs for some signage now. So is there a plan to do some short-term signage and then develop additional signage later on based on the master plan?
Yeah, I think one of the things that what Mark was talking about when we're getting together the proposal, the scope for it, it includes all of the partners that we've been talking about tonight. So we'll run the scope for the bike ped master plan by Iowa State, Story County, any of our other constituency groups, but mainly from a staff and technical planning standpoint. And then we can start to talk a little bit on a high level about what we can infill for a sign. So there's some obvious things, like for instance, the high trestle trail, like it's this way, use this trail, things that are really obvious. But some of the more detailed things about places to go in town, services, maybe kind of like how you would sign any other type of uses or points of interest. Some of those things we won't get to right away, but some of the glaring things like Iowa State University and other places that we know need to be signed, we can get ahead of that.
Great, thanks.
Is there anything else? No, it's good. All right. Next topic, if there aren't any questions on that, was related to maintenance activities. And we've asked Justin, our maintenance guru, to speak about it.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. If you can imagine, there's in any given year between 30 to 36 weeks when we can do maintenance on the transportation system in general, from motorist to multimodal. So as part of that, with increased emphasis on multimodal transportation, you know, our emphasis needs to be more on maintenance on that as well. So we need ways to help prioritize what and how we go about our maintenance activities, not only on the roadway, but also on bike infrastructure as well. So the way we sort of do that is we take, as Damien had mentioned before, data-driven decisions. Part of that is visual. Part of that comes from our visual inspection out on the field, things that we see. We can make notes and then go ahead and schedule it into our work activities. But other ways that we also do that is we also rely on user input. Ames on the Go app is something that Public Works has been very heavily invested in since the beginning of it, about 3 years ago. There's actually a category for trail maintenance, as you can see up there. In the 3 years, we've probably gotten between 60 and 70 trail maintenance requests. Most of them do not deal with, I would call maybe the smoothness or a pothole you might think of, but those sort of things can be submitted to us. So we really want to encourage people, anybody that's in the audience tonight or that uses this, let us know about those things, because we can't always be everywhere at all the time. We rely on the citizens to give us some of that input as well. And then one of the final things that we use for our data driven is really kind of neat, this Iowa data bike. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it or have seen it. This is part of the Des Moines Metropolitan Planning Organization. They have a bike that it's electric assisted, but goes around and takes not only video and photo of your trail system, but also has a phone that's on it with an accelerometer that records roughness. So they'll get data through that and then put it all together. Damien, if you can hit the next slide, please. And what we end up with is a map similar to what you see in the larger screen on the left there. Green being good, yellow being okay, and red maybe not good from a roughness standpoint. And a lot of that is it's not really calibrated well. It's a way for us to look at where should we be going, though, that we can see from a larger visual standpoint. And what you may notice there is a lot of the red areas are actually like intersections where you're coming down off a path across the street onto another path. So it may look daunting at first, like we've got a lot of problems. We can click, as you see in the photo on the upper right there, there's photos every, I don't know, it's about every 10, 15 feet that it takes automatic photos. And we can click in and see, okay, what am I really looking at? As you can see the photo there, there seems to be some thermal cracking and things going on that path. So we know pretty quickly what our maintenance activity should be without necessarily going out there. And we can start to plan those things as we move forward. So this data came in a little bit of 2018, a lot of 2019. Not much happened in 2020 with them. The pandemic, I think, slowed everyone and everything down. I have not been in conversation with them this year about coming to do it again. The good thing about the shared use path system is it doesn't change dramatically very quickly. It does change over time. But this is something that I'm going to be reaching out to them again to work. Can we get, in another year or two, have them ride the system again, and we can get another look at the data, similar to what we do on our roadways with a pavement conditioning index and stuff like that. It's another tool that we can use. So what I want to go through here, the next couple slides, are just give you an example of what we might see in the field and how we might fix it. I'll go through concrete first. Well, let me back up a second. There's $125,000 in our capital improvement plan that's specifically for shared use path maintenance. Majority of the work that we do there is with either a contractor or we're buying specific supplies for this sort of stuff. So as you see on the photo to the left there, that's a concrete shared use path, and it's pretty obvious it's deteriorated. You can see vegetation growing through the joints. The center photo shows it being repaired. It's pretty simple. Concrete's a very useful material. It's a rigid pavement. It resists freeze thaw, weathering cycles rather well. But the photo you see on the far right there, that I'd call it more like a hairline crack, that's something that you might see we may not fix right away. And the reason being is if you look at that, it hasn't displaced. It's still flat with each other, and it hasn't really opened up yet. So there are times where we might see this. We might say, we're going to wait on this. We're going to make a note and watch if it gets worse, or if there's more work in the area, we can collect it in. Sometimes collecting one small panel can be cost prohibitive to do it, but we still have that in mind, that we still have to give a good system at the end of the day. So this is sort of thing that you might see left for the time being, but the photo on the left might be one that we definitely look at doing.
Asphalt. So asphalt's the other primary material that you'll see for our shared use path. Asphalt, when it's new, is fantastic. It is very smooth. It provides a very good surface to ride on. Asphalt experiences challenges through time due to freeze thaw and thermal expansion and contraction. What you end up a lot is cracks, as you see in the first photo to the left, and large cracks, I'll call it, on that third photo from the left. Those sort of things happen over time. So what we do in order to help with some of that stuff is, you can see in the second photo, there's looks like the crack sealing. You can see the black joint going up there, and we've come through and crack seal. And the reason we do some of that is, while that path expands and contracts through sunlight and cold weather, we want to keep water and moisture from getting in there, because that can cause freeze thaw issues and can actually expand it even more. And what you see there on the third photo with a really wide crack, those are probably our biggest challenges. That path has gapped open for whatever reason. It just happens. So we use products such as an asphaltic mastic. We have contractors that can do a little bit of different path maintenance as well. But the issue we have with some of that, sometimes it does sag. We put it in there and it looks good for a year, then we come back and it sag a little bit. So we got to continually be on those things. And again, as I kind of talked early on, we're trying to be more proactive on these. And sometimes we can get to them before we see it get bad, and sometimes it's already there before we can even have a chance to be there. This is something that we've just started doing this fall that I want to continue coming into the spring here. I show a photo on the left of a path that has some cracks in it that we would go ahead and do our crack sealing through there. And then the photo in the center, the lighting's not great, but what it is, it's a really dark black, almost resurfacing. It's a micro surfacing slurry that we put on there. And what that does is that really seals up some of those fine cracks that you can't really get with our joint sealing machines. The other thing that it does is it builds up a very thin surface that's better for rideability and durability on the path as well. So we did a short section of this fall. It really needs warmer temperatures to do it. I've been working with a contractor for about 1.5 years to get him out here to do it, and we finally were able to do that. So we've done about 300 feet of it. We have a plan to do about 5 miles of it in the spring, early summer, once we get kind of some good temperatures to do that. And then should we get good results this winter, we'll continue with that as much as we can. Next slide, please, Amy. And this is the final example I'll show you here. The photo on the left, we've done everything we can with that path. It's at the end of its life. It's past the end of its life, to be honest. So overlays is something that we can do on a path such as this, or full replacement. Overlay might be a third the cost of full replacement. But with any of this, at times we have to pool money into future years in order to be able to accelerate that program, because the overlay might be such that we can't get it all done in one fiscal year with $125,000. So we pool some of that money, and then we'll come out with the project as soon as that's available to do there. So those are the kind of the examples of how we would do shared use path maintenance and what we look at there. So any questions, I'll happy to answer.
So I had a question on snow removal. Do you handle that piece as well?
The Parks and Recs does. I can probably answer if you got specific questions.
So, I mean, this has been a great improvement in Ames. There was a time when we didn't really move much snow on our trails, and now we're really trying to get a lot of the more arterial trails to help riders find a safer way instead of being on the streets in the winter. Could you speak to some of the sort of the philosophy of how we're doing snow removal on our trails?
It can be a challenge depending on where the path's at. So I'll first just say paths that maybe aren't at the back of curb or right next to roadways. So a lot of times what will happen is from the street transportation standpoint, our crews will be in before the shared use paths are starting to get cleared. A lot of that happens towards the end of the snow, so they can make a single pass to get through there. So you'll start seeing them come in towards the end of the snow event. What can happen if the shared use path is near the edge of the roadway? We end up wearing that snow out. So the big street trucks will push it onto the path, and then the shared use path guys will push it back into the street. And sometimes we get into that little, it happens. It's unfortunate. There's not always times you can push it to the outside. So there are times where you'll see areas where there'll be a little windrow at the curb line, and maybe we don't have the full 8 foot of shared use path. So what happens then is we come in with either our snow blowers or our big loaders after we've done everything else in town, and we'll come and actually load that stuff out. Thankfully, we don't have to do that very often because we usually don't get too much snow piled up, though I think last year and the year before both we had to do it. The 5 years before that, we didn't have to. So that's kind of the philosophy is, I know Parks and Rec and their team really focus on some of those arterial, those main collector areas, kind of like we do on the street system. Where are people trying to get to first? And then we work out towards the residential and some of the other areas like that.
I think a lot of people really appreciate that who bike commute and in the winter months even. So that's really appreciated. Final thing, we lost our vet med trail, and I love that surface. So it was more of like a pea gravel. Do we see that type of material again at some point in our system? I think a lot of people really like that as a surface. Is that a possibility for some of these trails?
Well, I think that's be something that we would definitely talk about in the bike ped master plan.
Okay.
Because when you get into, especially the greenbelt areas, a little bit of that Moore Memorial Park was a little bit what Keith was talking about, is having natural trails or chip trails. Those would be the kind of areas we would want them. But anything that tends to be a critical connection for the network, so even though it's through a park, it makes a critical network connection for transportation. It really generally needs to be hard surface so that it can be maintained quickly and efficiently, because the chip surfaces or any other type of natural surface is very hard to keep year-round operational.
Yeah. It was a beloved trail. A lot of people really enjoyed that trail. So
yeah, I think to Damien's point, especially winter maintenance with rock, it ends up going everywhere most of the time.
Yeah.
So
I have a couple of questions,
Yeah.
Justin. The first one may seem sort of silly, but with the Iowa data bike, how are we collecting the data on all of these cracks? I mean, it seems like when I ride a bike, I try to avoid cracks, right? So the operator has a choice of where to ride. Is this something that intentionally hits all the rough spots so we know where they are, or?
I do not believe so.
No, they just ride the center.
Yeah, I think it's just down the center line or close to it. They're not looking for every little bad area. So that's where, like I say, it's a piece of the puzzle, but not the only thing we rely on.
And the second question, I don't know whether it's for you or a larger question for John, because it's got to do with that $125,000 annually for the maintenance. It seems like costs have gone up, and I'm assuming $125,000 doesn't go as far as it used to for maintaining these paths and trails. And I'm wondering if this is, how long this has been the amount that we've had for trail maintenance, and is this something that needs to be reconsidered in the light of supply chain issues and increased costs for staffing, et cetera, to complete projects?
One thing I can say that, and I was going to touch on when Justin was done, was that the bike ped master plan, a major piece of that is maintenance. Not only like how we've been doing maintenance, is there any adjustments or improvements, but then forecasting. So the piece when I was talking about forecasting revenues and expenses, that includes maintenance. How much is, because as the system scales and expands, we will need to expand our maintenance costs. Potentially, I know a great example of it is the Minneapolis bike plan, goes into excruciating detail on costs, on staffing, on equipment, and they have, I think, 30 jurisdictions, maybe more, and who all is responsible for what. I mean, we won't have to do that jurisdictional breakdown, but you right size based upon proportion of your system all of the activities needed to maintain that system. And it would give guidance to Justin, and we have some agreement on what that equipment looks like, what the investment for maintenance looks like, and so forth. And when we hit those kind of critical points, then we can make budgetary proposals that would reflect that next major step in the trail expansion, the system expansion.
A more short-term or immediate answer to that question, though, is this is the time of year that we're preparing the proposed budget items, both the operational budget as well as the CIP. So those are the types of things that Justin and I will be looking at and making our proposed budget to Steve, and then eventually what council will see in a few months.
I just think it's nice to expand our trail system, but if we aren't also putting the money into maintaining what we've already got, then we're going to see other gaps arising and trails that people can't use. So I'm all in favor of us putting money into maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you.
the last item, at least of our presentation until we open up for a broader question and answer, was the use of eminent domain for filling in those gaps. And we have Mark Lambert here to explain our legal stance.
Hello. I've never stood up here, I don't think, and talking. I'm always sitting there, so it's kind of a different perspective. I think all of you know what eminent domain is, but just in case everyone watching on TV or in the audience doesn't know, eminent domain is the power that the government has to take private property for a public purpose. And the government can't just take that property; they have to pay a fair market value, just compensation for that property. So, so I've looked at the issue of whether the city of Ames can do eminent domain, use eminent domain to acquire property for trails, and my conclusion is yes, we can. There's some confusion out there in the legal world about it because there was a 1999 Iowa Supreme Court decision that said the Iowa DOT cannot use eminent domain for trails, and except if they're doing a trail next to a road that they're using eminent domain for the road, then they could do a trail. So, but that only applied to the DOT. It was very clear from reading the decision. And I've discussed this with other city attorneys, and they agree with my interpretation. And I know the city of Sioux City has used eminent domain for a trail. So it's yes, we can. There are some catches to it. The biggest one is that it does not, that authority, eminent domain authority, does not extend to, you can't use it for agricultural property of more than 10 acres. And so if you've got a piece of agricultural property that's less than 10 acres, you can use eminent domain for a trail. If it's more than 10 acres, you cannot use eminent domain for a trail unless the owner consents to the eminent domain. So it gets a little bit tricky perhaps, but I think the way it's phrased up there is pretty much captures that we can use eminent domain for trails, and again, does not include the authority to condemn agricultural land that is 10 or more acres. So. Okay. Any questions?
I do have a question.
Sure.
The way you phrased this is for recreational trails.
Yes.
Is it restricted to recreational, or we've been talking about shared use paths
Well,
or more than just recreation?
A shared use path is a recreational trail.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Well, that concludes all the main topics of what we wanted to cover in the workshop. It was a very wide range of issues. One of the things I wanted to touch on before perhaps we open it to general questions was some of the large planning documents, both for our long-range plan, our capital improvement plan, and the complete street plan, which is a special thing that we have here, are all on the city's website, and they get updated periodically. So these links don't change. If you want to find capital improvement plan, it's on the finance page, which if you're not aware, it's on the finance page of the city's website. And then same with the long range plan. It'll always be long range transportation planning. So even though we update CIP annually, we update the long range plan every 5 years, our link is the same. We'll just post the new version. So you always get the latest and greatest of what the documents and the plans are. And then of course you can always reach out to staff here in City Hall, and if you have any trouble finding these documents.
Thank you. All right, Council, additional questions?
So I wonder, Mayor, just given the size of the crowd we have, could we maybe start with the public input just to make sure we get through? Because I've got a long list of things, but I'm always around, so I'd like to hear from the people that came.
Anyone else have questions they want to ask before we open public input?
One question, just pragmatically, people are going to be sharing ideas tonight. I mean, this program will be recorded, but is there a way in which we're going to try and memorialize the input that we're receiving tonight?
Well, we have a secretary taking notes, and it's also being recorded. So,
okay.
And I think before we get into public comment, which will kind of set some guidelines, I have a few questions. I just want to clarification. One is the Forward 45 plan. was not done in a vacuum. Can you kind of discuss what kind of, how you got input from regarding, in particular, the bike infrastructure?
Yeah, no, it was like we were talking about earlier. We had 2 large open houses, and both included a digital, virtual open houses. So you could either come to in person and give your input directly to staff and our consultant, which we had at the library, or you could go online. I think we had several weeks the online comment and feedback form where you could draw in a line or you could put a dot on a map. Exactly the same kind of thing we did at the workshops. So we had two large open house public works workshops for the long range plan that include all of this bike ped planning where we provided feedback. We'll do something very similar. And actually the long range plan was actually more of our Ames local community process. Like I said, we already had a bike ped planning ethic, if you want to put it that way, built into our processes, and we've used that successfully, I believe, to the long range plan process. But this one, so when we do the master plan update, we will have workshops. We will collect, and that has a robust comment collection period, attendance. So that one of the things that we will do is you'll have a collection of all that feedback, both in policies, goals, specific projects, you name it. I mean, there's nothing off the table during that bike ped master plan public input process.
And that's where you get into a lot of the detail too.
As painful detail as you want, or if you want to come in with a 10,000 foot level concept, like I wish our system did this, there's really no limit to what type of feedback you can provide.
You also mentioned we invest $1.2 million per year or more for bike trail or bike infrastructure. That's not all just dedicated shared use path. You kind of just explain what all that includes, because it's kind of broad in scope.
Sure, yeah, and Mark explained a little bit of that. It's not just that shared use path expansion. It covers several of the CIP programs. So it's a $1.2 million minimum that we need to program in our CIP on average over that 5-year period. I believe, I don't have that in front of me, but I believe our current 5-year average is 1.65 million. So we're quite a bit above that minimum. But it will include a shared use path or bike lanes that might be in association with the street project. Multimodal projects like Mark mentioned, some of the accessibility enhancements if they have to do with that type of infrastructure. So it does cover a wide range of programs.
And the $125,000, that's in addition for the maintenance, is that correct?
Right.
Okay. All right, we'll open up public comment. As we talked about, this is just basically a primer, I'll call it, and kind of give an overview. And so we're going to invite people to offer input, but if it starts getting into details, I might ask you to either follow up with an email or wait until we do the master plan. So I know that we probably didn't explain that we usually try and use orange cards. In the absence of that, I have one orange card I'll invite to come up first. When you come up, if you introduce yourself and give your address, and I am going to ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes or less tonight. So allows people to be general in nature. And can I see a show of hands how people would like to give input tonight? Because what I want to do is I want to make sure that we allow time for council to have some conversation. And my goal is to have us finished up by 8 o'clock. Okay, so 3 minutes should certainly work fine. Okay. All right. So I have a card from Lon, if you want to come up to the podium. And then if you are interested in addressing council, come on up, Lon. And then if someone else wants to come up and stand behind him next in front of Danielle over here, then when Lon is done, you can go ahead and come to the podium.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Ames is a beautiful community.
Sorry, your name, please, and then also your address, and you can go ahead and get started. And if you wouldn't mind taking off your mask while you're speaking, just so we can go ahead and hear you so you're not muffled, okay? Okay. Thank you.
My name is Lon, and Ames is a beautiful community. We have amazing people, but we're all flawed human beings to some degree, you know? And Mr. Mayor, thank you for accepting my card. I prefer to talk about the subject matter individually or exchange emails or a phone call, if we could do that. And, you know, we just want to keep Ames as best as possible, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So could you please send me an email stating a time to meet?
Sure. I will do that.
Are you the mayor?
I am.
Oh, I apologize. I thought he was the
This
mayor.
is the city manager. Come on now. He'll probably say, I never want to be mayor, right?
Correct. Okay.
Correct.
So that's why I was kind of, yeah, I apologize.
Actually, I'll delegate it to him. He'll be in contact with you. How's that sound?
But can we meet?
Yep. I got your email. I'll take care of
Okay,
you.
thank
you,
you.
Lon.
Good evening. Steve Libby for the Ames Bicycle Coalition. 708 Brook Ridge is my address. I don't know if we were looking for that. I just want to say thanks for the workshop, the general information. A couple of quick comments. Really appreciate Mark and Damien in particular and Chris making the specific point that ISU and the city is going to continue to really try and coordinate. It's pretty important for the 800-pound gorilla in the room to be talking with the other 800-pound gorilla in the room and make sure that those conversations are continued effectively. The other thing with regards to connections, it's very exciting to see that we're finally getting to the point where a lot of the pieces are starting to get connected. One comment with regard to that, of course, is intersections. You can build all the paths you like. They can come as close as they like to each other, but if you don't effectively deal with the intersections, you still have a fractured network. And finally, I think putting the bike master plan up is very exciting to see that progressing forward. So look forward to that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Hi, my name is Jake Drehas. Do you need my address as well, or
Yes, please.
Physical or email?
Pardon me?
Physical or email?
Physical.
Physical. 3612 South Duff.
Thank you.
So it's great to be here, and I'm particularly excited that a connection to the regional trails, the High Trestle Trail and the Heart of Iowa Nature Trail, those are pretty high priority things to me. I'm glad to see it's being worked on. However, it seems to be that the R38 on-street bike path is pretty much a linchpin in that connector plan. And without mincing words, that trail is pretty terrible. It's an on-street bike path. There's no shoulder through most of that, meaning that you're limited just to the width of the painted trail. The edges of the pavement are also fairly deteriorated, making it more narrow in a lot of places, and traffic is rather high. So while it's quite exciting to me to see that the connection to the regional trails is a priority, the fact that it relies on a trail that I and people that I ride with often go out of our way to avoid is a little disheartening to see that that's sort of what's being designed around. That's really the extent of my thoughts on the matter.
Thank you, Jake.
Hi, my name is Joel Wacker. I'm at 5244 Schubert Street in West Ames. Kind of building off of what he was talking about too. I had some comments on that where one thing that I feel like always gets overlooked with bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is a focus on creating paths designed for children, just around safety in general. Children can't drive, so walking and bicycling is actually a really great way to allow them to have their own freedom and independence. It's also a great way that they can get to school on their own. And in general, I found the trails I really like the most, looking at like the High Trestle Trail or I forget now the name of it, the one that goes between Huxley and Cambridge. That trail often has a lot of children biking on it or families. Very inviting to a community. I feel like that's something that could really encourage biking overall. So just questions in general on safety of bike infrastructure in the future and current system.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michael Pillman. I live at 1417 Mayfield in West Ames. I have a few comments on just a few things that I've noticed. For a little bit of context, I ride with Ames Velo, the local club here in town that caters to a bunch of different levels of riders, from your very casual recreational riders all the way up to your elite racers, essentially. Now, most of the time we use the roads to kind of get out of town to kind of ride on the county roads because, we ride at often 18, 20 miles an hour. So it's not really safe for us to ride generally on the shared use paths that are here, just due to the nature. It's better to do it that way. But there are a few things that I've noticed, at least. One of them being Duff Avenue, especially on the north end. Recently, in the last, I think, year, there was some restriping done on the road up there, which allowed for a shared use path to be in. However, in certain areas, that trail is essentially half of a gutter. And so you have a gutter, and then you have half of a bike lane, essentially. So really, it just feels like a glorified shoulder more than anything else. And that's something that I feel is not safe for, for multiple reasons. I could go into detail, but limited time, I'm going to keep myself kind of reserved here. But it's something that I would maybe consider is looking at like how these trails that are on roads of the lower volumes that aren't separated entirely, maybe how they incorporate with the traffic as well. That's something that I feel really should be looked at and considered, and should maybe look at it from the bicycle's perspective of, okay, how does a bicycle feel on this? Do they feel safe? Do they feel like they won't ride this? Because if they don't feel safe on it, they'll avoid it. I know I avoid many paths in town just because it's, quite frankly, kind of dangerous. So just rather not do that. So thank you.
I just point of clarification. You said north, the north end of Duff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, north end of Duff to 30th Street, essentially.
Are you familiar with what we're talking about? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Jerry Neal, 916 Ridgewood Avenue, on behalf of the Ames Bicycle Coalition. I think that, or I'd like to see the council and the staff seriously consider as a part of this master plan development, which is a good idea, investing in a position for a bike ped coordinator. Right now, we have a continued commitment to maintaining our vehicular modes of traffic and speeds, and we're trying to knit that together with this ever-expanding network of shared use paths and on-bike trails and other things. So there is a lot of confusion about use. I think that contributes to a lot of unsafe practices, both by the bicyclists and by the drivers of cars who aren't paying attention. I think a very huge need in this community is to increase education and outreach and have a really focused effort on that for these communities as we're expanding these paths. It's something that we need to invest in and we need to do to make this safe for everybody that's using the trails. And so I think it's important as we continue to do this that we think about investing in someone to actually hold that position. And I'm amazed at what Damien and crew are able to juggle as far as we have a plan for this, a plan for that, a plan for this, a plan for that. And he's really good with the technology, but there's another piece to this. And that other piece is teaching people how to respect and use all these intersecting pieces that we have out there. So I'd certainly like to make a pitch for that. I think it'd be a really important thing for us to consider doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Galen Welke, 1504 Golden Aspen Drive. Two things real quick. First, very impressive. Every time I'm out, I see a new electrically powered personal transportation contraption of some sort or another. There's scooters, electric skateboards, there's these one-wheel things, there's the old Segways. And if you're going to hire a consultant, maybe you could ask them to conjure the future on these things because they are multiplying like mad. I think nobody will walk anymore pretty soon because they're so cheap and so easy. The second thing is I personally worry about the safety at some intersections. And like Mortensen and University, I often run there, and the right lane only turns right. And if you're northbound, almost no car will see you as a pedestrian. And I had the same experience at the top of Highland Road where it connects to 13th, when you have a forced right turn in a lane and a shared use path coming along, those are very dangerous intersections. And maybe the safety aspect could be worked into it a little bit strongly, more strongly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dana Conrad. My address is 1531 Douglas Avenue. And this might not be the right meeting to give this input, but I'd like to suggest a specific piece of bike infrastructure. I think it would be value added to have a path that extends west out of town on Lincoln Way from Wilder Avenue to XC and XB Place along that stretch. There's not even a paved shoulder there. And personally, I work out on XB Place, and I like to ride my bike when I can. But I often see people as well, pedestrians along that stretch. And I think it's a very extremely dangerous to ride or be a pedestrian on that stretch. So with the apartments, the mobile home park, and all the businesses located out on those XC and XB, I think this would be a smart value-added thing to construct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Welsh Wingate at 1117 Wilson Avenue. And I guess I was surprised to see that Story County isn't here when we're talking about connections into regional trails. But I just wanted to give a plug into seeing if we could go down the Skunk River to connect to the Heart of Iowa Trail, because that would be, as the other gentleman was talking about, family-friendly, scenic. You know, I have a lot of values as a destination trail instead of just trying to get there along a road that's, you know, when we're out cycling a high trestle trail, there's two parts that aren't fun. Going on R38 and that other section that kind of coming out of Polk City that's from the south is uphill into the wind and kind of boring and straight. So, you know, it's not an appealing attraction that way. So just putting a plug in for a path down the Skunk.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Telke, 926 Idaho Avenue. I just want to reiterate what a lot of people have said about the safety, especially with intersections. I had an unfortunate incident on the old Vet Med Trail recently where I was T-boned by a golf cart and ended up with 10 stitches and got stuck in the cart. And actually, Councilman Martin reached out and was very gracious and brought this up. So I think in my particular, I would be interested in gates or speed bumps or things that will slow carts down in the Coldwater Creeks, especially now this is paved, unfortunately. So get a lot more traffic, and I think it's a very significant danger that if you're out golfing, you don't expect to have bicycles intersecting you. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Lorna Carroll, and I live on Tullamore Lane up near McFarland Park. And my question is how to get a bike or multi-use path considered installed along Dayton Avenue. I know that's outside, most of it's outside of the city limits. So there'd be other entities that would have to be involved. But I moved there a year and a half ago, and I think I emailed the council. You know, it is a pretty hazardous stretch of road for the amount of people that use it. And the amount of vehicles that use it cutting through, going north and getting on the highway. So maybe that's not a conversation for here because this is strictly city, you know, the city of Ames, but how do I move forward on getting other groups to consider it, and what are the next steps? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jeff White, 1421 Carroll here in Ames. I ride a bicycle a lot in town, and I try to do my shopping and socializing and what I can as much as possible by bicycle. Unfortunately, I live on the east side, and there's really not very good north-south communication on the east side of town. I would really like to see that improved. I think this is wonderful that the City Council is looking into this and making a long-term plan, but I hope that that plan includes ways for many of us to shop, to go to shopping locations, and to do our general transportation by bicycle, not just as recreation, but as a way of life. So please think about all the places that we need to go and that we want to go, and I'd really like to see connections with that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole Rasmussen, 2808 Northridge Lane. I guess my husband and I do a lot of running and biking in Ames, and we love the trail system. We feel like there's a lot of times they're not connecting in a safe way. And so a couple things that as we run a lot and bike a lot, I think about it from the tourist attraction piece of it, of people coming to Ames to specifically for the purpose of enjoying the biking community. We travel to a lot of communities around the country, and we go there to do those things, run and bike. And so things that drive traffic to such as a place like the downtown area, I think about the river, I'm not sure the name of it, the River Valley Trail out east by the softball and softball fields. If there was a trail that would connect from out there downtown with clear signage, I think that would be a really nice addition to drive traffic to areas that we need more, retail business. And so connecting the amenities and trails and connecting tourism would be a positive thing for the community. Thank you.
Dan DeGeest, 1819 Bel Air. First of all, it's good to see you all. It's been quite a while since I've been in here. I've been harping on bicycle stuff for a really long time. And first of all, I just want to say that over the 10, 12, 13 years where I've been doing it, there's just been a lot of improvement, and we are making steps, and it has been a really good process. And so I just want to thank everybody for where we've gotten compared to where we were like 15 years ago. So it's been quite of a big improvement. I don't work too much with the ABC anymore, but also thank you to the ABC for the work that they continue to do. So the only point I really wanted to make tonight was I've emailed you all on a couple of different topics, and just the concept of, we get all these different plans and all these different documents, and they kind of start to live on their own in their own world, and we don't always think about all of them in a holistic way. And so, for example, I emailed you guys about the aquatic center and along with historic preservation and some other things. So with the bike ped plan going forward, just to if there's a formal way, or just to keep in mind, how does that play with all the climate action stuff that we're doing right now? And bicycles and pedestrians clearly has an impact on our climate, carbon emissions and all that type of stuff. So how do those two plans work together? Keep those in mind. Again, with the aquatic center, was there any decision matrix on how do bikes and peds get to this new facility? So as we're doing all these other projects across the city in all the different areas, just trying to keep all of this stuff working together, and not just be right now we're focusing on bike peds, and we're gonna go do some stuff, then we're gonna go build a pool, then we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do that. So let's just try to keep working on keeping it all together in a holistic goal. And thank you for all your time and effort.
Anybody else? All right, we'll close public input. Council?
Mayor, I'd like to follow up on what Dan just said, because I've been thinking about this relationship. What is the relationship going to be between a bike ped master plan and the climate action plan, or the bike ped master plan and Forward 2045, which has our public transit component. And often the bus lanes and the bicycle lanes are kind of in competition for road space. So how are these different planning efforts going to be working together?
Well, I'll start with the climate action plan. So I'm one of the staff that is part of the technical team for the development of the climate action plan. And from my gathering with the consultant is they have all the categorical breakdown in the climate action plan, one of those subcategories being transportation. So essentially it's all things transportation. They look at vehicular travel, they look at non-motorized travel, they include things like the airport. So any kind of carbon footprint related to transportation has a piece of the climate action plan. So just like any plans are kind of like a Mobius loop. One plan makes some assumptions and policies and they feed into another and you adjust a plan. So not having the climate action plan approved, I can't necessarily how to say it will provide feedback to transportation, but it will have some goals and policies related to how we adjust our transportation focus that will fit in with the climate action plan and what we need to do from a carbon reduction standpoint that way. As far as kind of the modal integration, so the long range plan will still serve as the primary vehicle for all the different multimodal integration. I mean, that's the point of a metropolitan planning organization, is it is regional transportation. So all that it does is it makes it extremely clear what the city of Ames priorities are for non-motorized travel. And instead of having to go through when you're at a public meeting for the long range transportation plan and you're talking about your experience traveling with cars or what you want to do to improve the bike system or what you want to do to improve the transit system, we would have had a lot of that discussion and the goals and the policies and things related to walking and biking from the bike ped master plan. And we can save a lot of that effort and consultant expense, frankly, to take the next highest priorities and put that in the long range transportation plan. Because again, it's mainly focused on federal aid eligibility. So we'll take the projects that we want to do that, but it would still incorporate and reflect the bike ped master plan. But instead of being an MPO approval, an MPO update, and an MPO review, it would be City of Ames. And so it really would reflect better our growth policies in the comp plan and local policies. And so it's kind of hard to say, but if you look at any planning document, it will always refer to other plans. So the comp plan will refer to the long range transportation plan. Now it will refer also to the bike ped master plan. I'm sure the comp plan refers to the climate action plan. And all of these things is our job essentially to put the pieces and parts together. That's why, like, if you look at the climate action plan, I think there's 15 different departmental staff, technical staff involved in the pieces and parts of it. I think some of the concern related to what the public input tonight is that some of those updates in that Mobius loop I described, that feedback system lags a little bit. So there could be some issues that one plan is trying to address but hasn't addressed yet. Like maybe there's a connection or a gap or some critical infrastructure piece that hasn't been built but is planned for and going to be built. Well, another plan like the climate action plan is going to still assume that project isn't done. And so it's going to show a detriment. It's going to show a deficit of some sort. And so until that project, and that's why these plans are always updated, at least some of them, it can be easily updated, will be updated annually. The ones that are larger efforts are a 5-year update. It's hard to say that you would have some of these major planning documents that would sit on the shelf without an update for more than 10 years, but it depends on what it is. I mean, the long range plan is a mandatory 5-year update. We will, when we come back with the bike ped master plan, which will include everything we talked about tonight. So like the users, the abilities of the users, what's appropriate in all the different pieces and parts of the system, how the bike ped, how the non-motorized infrastructure connects with the transit system. A good example of that being You look at essentially walking sheds or bike sheds for how far somebody might need, somebody, for instance, who needs transit. If they're going to walk and bike to get to a transit route, because the transit route doesn't go everywhere in town, the bike ped master plan could take some of the analysis that SIRIDE does and says, well, where do I need to have bike and ped access from wherever they are to a transit route? We could reflect some of that's something that SIRIDE oversees. So we will integrate all the modes to the maximum extent we can. But again, like there is some lag associated with it. But our plan will address safety. It will address users' abilities, and it will address growth areas, so all those gaps. So even if it's not in our jurisdiction today, we look at the comp plan and we expect that to be a growth area and would become part of Ames. And we do work with the county. We do have a fringe plan that includes areas outside Ames jurisdiction for how growth is to be done and some mutual agreement with the jurisdiction. I understand this is a very long-winded answer, but there's a lot of pieces to it. Mm-hmm. And so the juggling act that they were kind of referring to is all those plans. So us as staff, whether we're directly in charge of updating a particular piece or plan, we are definitely involved in every other planning effort. And whether it's an MPO activity, a city activity, or whatnot, we're involved at some point. So, which is why perhaps if you try and call us sometimes, we don't get back to you too early because we might be at a meeting talking about a plan update or something like that. So,
Damien, I appreciate the fact that Jerry Peters came from the school district. Can you just comment in brief about how the school district gets involved before we continue on with additional comments or questions from the council?
Well, absolutely. So one of the comments related to the school district, to Iowa State, to the aquatic center, to whatever special generators and special attractions, all those things need to be handled differently within a plan. So we have general transportation, we have recreational transportation. All those things are going to mix. But when you get to Iowa State University, or you get to a high school, or you get to an elementary school, if you've been to an elementary school, there's intense mixing of traffic and bikes and cars. All of those things, and that just relates back to what is an appropriate fix for whatever problem there might be, makes it the most safe, the most efficient. And so you would look at a school area and what's appropriate there differently than a suburban fringe area of town. So we look at the schools and coordinate. And so we bring in people like Jerry. I've met several times with a lot of the elementary school principals. They're great resources to tap into, and obviously parents, anybody who wants to come to the meeting, and they do. And we do get parents and students to come to provide feedback to any workshop we have. But it's really the special case of a school, the special case of a pool or other regional recreational center, and then places like the university, obviously. They all have different needs and they need to be molded together. But that's why if you look at the complete street plan or any of our design guides, there isn't just one size fits all. It's a range of what might be acceptable. I think one of the things that was commented on tonight was, we maybe built A, but we wanted B. And I think one of the things that we deal with when we look at corridors and implementing some of these plans is we have an ideal bike facility, or we have an ideal street facility. But when we go to build it, we're constrained by right-of-way. We're constrained by money. We might be constrained by a 100-year-old tree we don't want to cut down. There could be a whole host of things that might be an impediment to the perfect bike facility. And I think one of the things that is important with this bike ped master plan is that you get to have a discussion about, okay, we can't have the perfect facility on the street, but can we make a safe one? And what can we live with? Or do we need to look at another route? We just need to do it like this route because of the history of how the town grew or how a street and right-of-way was acquired. We cannot fit the perfect facility. That doesn't mean we give up on the network or we give up on that perfect ideal, but we do need to start to say what is acceptable, because we do want to make some sort of connection, and making sure that that's appropriate for every user and every skill level. That's going to be part of that broader discussion that you see in a bike ped master plan.
So, I have a couple comments and questions, but before I get to my little punch list, this is an amazing turnout tonight. We haven't seen this many people in council chambers in a really long time. So that some of these people have never been in a council chamber before. And so this was the hook to get you to come tonight. So thanks for coming out tonight. So I've been trying to collect some ideas and questions that would be appropriate for tonight. There's a growing interest in providing opportunities for mountain biking, single track mountain biking in Ames. The metro area has got a new facility coming in. It's going to be fantastic. Are we giving some thought to providing an amenity for people that would be of great interest to them?
I think what I would do, so as far as the street network, obviously not something that we could fit in there, but it might be something that like Parks and Rec, we could ask during that bike ped master plan update if that was a goal of a connection to that type of facility, but it'd be housed in some kind of park or other type of property. We would just refer to it, but actually creating a standalone mountain bike track. If we had the land, I guess we could look for it in the plan, but it sounds to me more like something that maybe the parks system could look into.
One of so Ada Hayden has been such an incredibly popular destination that there's now oftentimes conflict between walkers and cyclists at Ada Hayden. I'm a big fan of the Minneapolis bike trail system, and there's a lot we can learn. Obviously, it's a much bigger complex, but around some of the lakes there, they'll have 2 lanes, one for cycling and one for walkers and runners. Again, that's something we're going to cite tonight, but something as perhaps a placeholder that we want to give some thought to. There's going to be some expense in adding that lane, but I wonder if there's enough traffic there at some point to think about that as a possibility. A couple places that I don't see on our cap improvements plan that I'd like for us to think about. The South Duff extension is going to be fantastic. I'm sorry, South Grand extension is going to be fantastic. So if you've ridden up from South 16th and you're going to get to Lincoln Way, you're going to find yourself going, where do I go now? And so I am very excited about the FY 22-23 plan to extend bike amenities further. But I don't know if you can take a look at that on the map. I appreciate you bringing that up. Someday, I think it would be phenomenal to have a off-road trail going from all the way from South 16th all the way to Ada Hayden. And we don't have that much to cover. So these are really perhaps on the west side of Grand Avenue, taking sidewalks and turning them into bike paths. There's not much further to go. And then you have a major thoroughfare, a north-south corridor that would be phenomenally popular. Similarly, the East River Valley Trail is one of the great undervalued resources in our community. It is fabulous, but it ends at Lincoln Way and you have nowhere to go. The sidewalk on Lincoln Way going west is not safe. Imagine if we extended that, have a bike trail on Lincoln Way, probably on the south side would make the most sense, but extend that trail on Lincoln Way all the way into downtown. That's exciting as a prospect. I am thrilled with this Dayton Avenue in 25 and 26. I wish that could be sooner, but for a lot of people that are wanting to ride hard, having that, if we could eventually have some kind of circuit all the way around Ames, that would be amazingly popular. So people would come and they would just, I promise you, see lots of people on that South Dayton extension. One more piece. We're thinking about trails both from a commuting perspective, but again, recreationally, the East River Valley Trail is again a gem, but if it continues going north along the river and then it stops, it comes to an abrupt halt. And if you've ever been out there, your response is, oh, I just want to keep going. So I would love for us to have a community conversation about whether it's the use of eminent domain. I don't know who owns all the different parcels, but imagine being able to walk or bike from East River Valley Park up to Ada Hayden. That's doable. That's exciting. I mean, I think people would be really pumped. And
I would ask, please refrain from, we assume that you all support these kind of things. So I would just ask that out of respect and decorum, No clapping, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Tim.
But I just think that is an opportunity. We've got the parts there. We just have to connect those parts. I think this thing would be a phenomenal thing. And I don't know if there'd be a possibility, working with Iowa State and with the county, a possible area for some off-road dirt bike riding would be on the east side of the river, east in the East River Valley Park area. So there are deer trails. I've run out there, and it's beautiful, beautiful wooded area. If there's a way we could create some partnerships and create some dirt trails back there, it'd be very low budget. I mean, even if we were able to do something with the gravel to connect to Ada Hayden on the west side, oh my stars, people would flock there. And I want to make one more comment about the High Trestle Trail. It's come up several times tonight. This is a great resource in central Iowa, but we're sort of landlocked to get there. I've ridden R38 a number of times. I don't feel safe on there. And I just wish there was some way we could do something off trail to get us to the High Trestle Trail. I think that people in the metro area want to come to Ames. Nicole mentioned this from a tourist perspective. I think there's a real interest in finding a way to come to Ames to utilize our amenities here, but people really don't have a safe way of getting there. So anyway, those are a couple of my comments tonight, and look forward to hearing other comments from council.
I was thinking about the level of funding that we have designated every year and how now we're spending more than our established minimum. And it occurred to me it's time to bump up that minimum, I think. Because it was 1.2. That was one of the earlier things I think I did when I got on council. And I think to keep up with the times, we need to consider ratcheting that minimum up. So that'd be something that I'll think about, or that we should think about for this budgeting cycle is. And I mean, I think the master plan, I suppose, would help establish that, right? Like minimum levels of funding. But what I'm hearing, if we're spending more than that already, it's time to move that up, I think. Also, how can we, and maybe there's nothing that can be done, but a lot of times I see a plan that's in the CIP for a certain year, and it's heavily delayed, right? So I know that it's not only the planning of it, but also construction delays and things like that. Is there any way we can get more ahead of that, so that things that are currently delayed out 2 years beyond the date they were supposed to be done? I mean, is there anything other than more funding that can help with that, I guess?
Well, I think that's kind of what you're describing perhaps might be one of the other cons or downfalls of the long-range transportation plan is that another requirement of the federal aid that we use on that plan is that we cannot do engineering. It will not let us even do preliminary engineering. So by the time we inherit a plan and want to do a project and we try to program it, because we need to be able to work at all on a project, we need to program it in some way. And that's when we start to look at right-of-way impacts. That's when we start to look at acquisition, doing estimates, things like that, the environmental impacts, all the things that are typically done at a preliminary engineering level, you cannot do in a long-range plan process. But we can we won't go too deep, but we can start to look at those issues. Like, for instance, I brought up all the projects that were considered during the long-range plan. There could be some of those issues that cause delays that we could get ahead of in the bike ped master plan and start to program. And I think you see a little bit, council's probably seen that a little bit now in the current CIP, is that we're trying to program more studies, more land acquisitions to get ahead of those, so that when we actually get into the construction, it doesn't feel like kind of a false promise. Like we said you're going to build it, why isn't it there?
Yeah.
So I think the learning from that process and improving that process, but the delays are related to things that we can't figure out because of the time and money on the long range plan, that we have the same kind of frustration, I think, that you have, that we don't want to delay a project because of those other impacts.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts I would share, the comments about R38 being scary to ride on. I don't think that's a good end goal for how we want to connect to the High Trestle Trail. And you've heard, I think, several people say that. So otherwise, I don't know that I have any other specific comments. I'm excited about the idea of getting more of it into a plan, I guess. So.
Maybe one thing I'd offer related to the High Trestle specifically, since it's been brought up a lot, and perhaps maybe Tim's comment about Ada Hayden and what level of facility is appropriate there. I think that those are exactly the types of issues that we need to bring up during that plan development and look at what is a priority, how it affects budget. But one of the things I think is always important, and we talk about this during our annual coordination with bike constituents when we try to figure out projects, is that we don't want necessarily the enemy, like the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And the reason why I say that is, yes, most people would say it is not enjoyable to be on R38, but it is a connection. And that doesn't mean you stop, and that we don't have a plan that doesn't have a longer term, perhaps harder to acquire, higher level of service trail down to the High Trestle Trail. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't first start, and there could be lots of other locations where we can make connections that aren't perfect, but they start off and some users could get there, and then we can expand and make them better. So I think that's the right way to look at it, that we haven't given up on the High Trestle Trail, we would love it to be a green belt trail all the way there. But there's a lot of landowners, and perhaps what our city attorney talked about makes it very difficult because it is all ag land. But that doesn't mean we couldn't start planning for another connection down that way.
Cool, thank you.
As we wrap up tonight, I just wanted to summarize what I think I heard in some of the public comments. And Damien, maybe you and John or Mark could comment on this. One is, and it goes back to the R38, the condition of the shoulder. That's really out of our purview. Is that correct? That's really a DOT situation.
No, it's in the county, and yeah, it's a state route.
So they're aware of that situation, or that he brought their attention in terms of a concern raised by.
Yeah, just county.
Pardon
me. It's not a DOT right away. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's not. That's county. Okay,
right.
So. And I see the county's here, so I'm sure they duly noted it. So anyway, secondly, Lauren Carroll asked about how you extend something up north on Dayton Road, which again goes outside the city limits. That's not part of our master plan, or would that be part of the master plan because it goes outside the city limits?
No. The master plan is specifically to address what is in the corporate limits and what's in our growth areas. So our growth areas will be unincorporated. One of the partners, the development of the bike ped master plan, needs to be all the jurisdictions that those areas currently are in, so that to whatever extent we can meld those plans together. And you can see, for instance, that Dayton connection is shown as a yellow line. That's kind of why it's not in the current long range plan, is because any medium tier project was unfunded, but we do know a connection is needed. And there is some, the other thing too that I think will be helpful for the public is what projects are expected to be done by the city or in coordination with other agencies, and then what ones are, because we do have quite a bit of projects that are development driven that we expect to be part of the street and other infrastructure investment that happens in those growth areas. So all those types of things need to be clarified. And then some of the questions maybe we heard tonight about, well, why isn't this happening, or why isn't it happening now, or when should I expect it? And let's say we have the bike ped master plan, it's been adopted, and we have that kind of comment come up. Us as staff can come to council and say, whenever we need to update that plan, should we adjust our plan to change our focus? I think that's kind of the beauty of the bike ped master plan, is it allows that effort to go through some rigor every once in a while in some periodic way, where you get to have the discussion. Are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving fast enough, et cetera, et cetera?
And the master plan will also pick up a lot of the concerns that were raised regarding safety issues at the intersections, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is in there, like the long range plan did look at critical crossings of intersections. And in our multimodal transportation plan is where we've programmed those high priority crossings. So the multimodal program in the CIP is intended to deal with some of those. And most of them are arterial street crossings where they're major intersections where you have a lot of traffic and a lot of conflict points where we need to try and manage those. And there's a lot of good modern treatments that can be applied to an intersection compared to what's traditionally out there. So that program is where we'd be able to make those improvements at those major intersections so that per some of the comments, like I love this route, but I get to this street and it's unsafe to cross. The multimodal program is where we can make those fixes.
And I would add golf cart bike intersections too, it sounds like. So,
well, the VetMed Trail, we submitted a whole signing and marking because that's probably one of the main problems with those two crossings is that they're completely unmarked. They won't be in the very near future. They'll be completely signed. One of the major improvements is we'll have an actual stop sign and they should. I mean, they're entering public right of way from private property, but we'll make that clear with some stop signs for the carts that are using the easement areas across the path.
Very good. All right. Well, as Councilman Garten said, thank you all who came tonight, and we're going to wrap up the workshop on bicycle infrastructure, and we only have two other items on the agenda. One is disposition of communications to council, which I believe we do not have any tonight. So we'll go to council comments, and we'll start with Gloria.
As I was coming in, I was noticing how many people were parking bikes at the bike rack, and it occurred to me that perhaps we need some more bike racks here at City Hall in front to encourage attendance at our meetings. And I thank you all for coming and giving your feedback. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Tim?
This has been a really exciting evening tonight. I think there's a perception among some that the bike trails are solely a recreational amenity, and that's simply not true. There are many people who make lifestyle decisions that they commute for their major form of transportation, and it's a growing number of people. And so we need to see our community from a lens that for whom bicycling is their major form of transportation. It is a climate issue, as Dan mentioned. If we want to encourage people, we want to really get serious about encouraging people to bike, then we've got to make the commitment to provide the opportunities for them to do that. And it is, as Nicole mentioned, it's a tourist issue. I mean, there are so many different levels on which this subject operates. And I think there's a tremendous amount of community support for building upon the foundation that we have. And there's a great turnout tonight, but I also appreciate all the staff work to get us here tonight. That's comments tonight. Thank you.
Rachel?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the workshop tonight too, and I think it's a great starting point, especially to have this bike and pedestrian master plan kicked off. I wanted to comment that some of the bikers out there, if there are certain trails that you avoid, we'd love to hear about that and get more specific information on the Ames on the Go app or emailing us. We definitely don't want our bikers to be avoiding certain trails if we can fix them. So I think that's just one thing, is continue to be engaged and reach out to us.
Rylan?
Nothing for me. Thanks.
David?
No comments tonight.
All right. Well, thank you to all the partners too. Thank you to the county for Jerry Peters coming, and Iowa State coming as well too, and others that participated, staff. It was a great presentation and very informative. And as we close up, Damien, can you just kind of explain to those that are still in the audience how they can get involved or what they should be looking for? So when the master plan gets going, is there some kind of a sign up that you're going to have on the website or something like that to make sure that they can be notified and schedule wise? Or
yeah, absolutely. I think we tend to like to do what we did with the long range plan, was that once we get our consultant on board, they always have, and one of the requirements we ask of them is all of the public communication plan. So any kind of print, any kind of web, any kind of social media interaction. How do somebody sign up for like any kind of mailing list that you want to stay informed? So it will be the full range of communication. We'll be able to put it out on our city social media. So like go to this site, look for this, sign up here. Yeah, we'll have all those type of communications going out when that program kicks off, or that project kicks off, excuse me.
And do you have any kind of, I know you said gave a range of this winter. Are you looking at late winter, early spring, March, April, May to have a consultant on board so they can have an idea when you're thinking about?
Yep. So we'll start, have a consultant on board, and council will probably see a contract for that here in late winter, early 22, so that we have time as staff to prep them if they're, I mean, one of the things we want them to have is hopefully some experience with the community, but we will have all those public outreaches and be able to hit the ground running for the spring, where you really start to see a lot of activity kick off. People are thinking about trails and thinking about being outside. I think the public would start to see things early spring, because we would want to start whatever effort before Iowa State's out of a school session here in the spring.
Very good. All right. Thank you all for coming, and I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn?
We're adjourned. Thank you.